many memories that I have of growing up in Danvers. One that was special this time of year during the summer was the annual bonfire behind the Holton Richmond School. And each year we'd watch the construction of the bonfire with pallets and with big wooden, I don't know if they were whiskey barrels, we weren't sure what they were. But we would, for weeks before the 4th of July, you'd watch the bonfire being built behind the Holton Richmond. Everybody was excited about it. And then the 4th of July celebration, that was the highlight. They would light that bonfire and would be down there, and it was looked like a huge rocket ship on fire. It was a wonderful time. One of the things that was near and dear to me during my youth in Danvers was the farming that we had. Danvers, the carrot community, truly a farming town. Typert Farm, McDermott Farm, Clark Farm, Rest Farm, Tutco Farm, just a whole number of farms. I worked, actually my first job was working at Rest Farm, which is on Ash Street near my home. And that's currently the Liberty Tree Mall. Part of the mall was Tutco Farm, but the largest portion was Rest Farm. It was a hay field, a hay farm, and corn farm. So I used to work, 50 cents an hour was the going rate. For a kid, I was probably about 12. And you'd show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and be handed a hoe, and you'd point to an acre or so of corn and say, get out there and just start cutting out the weeds between the corn. And come back at 12 o'clock. So I'd go out there and do that until noon, come back for 15 minutes for lunch, and then go right back out there and do the next acre and do that until the end of the day. And then when hay season came, get behind the hay baler, which was a tractor with a device, a machine that actually baled the hay on it with a trailer. And of course, as I said, I was about 12 years old. I was probably 80 pounds soaking wet. And that just happened to be about what a bale of hay weighed. So picture me out there, and it's 98 degrees, and baling the hay, and all the dust is going in, you're coughing and whatever. So you're trying to lift that bale of hay and put it on that trailer before he gets too far in front of you, because then you're trying to drag it to catch up with the trailer. Well, it took me a while to get the knack of that, and I was cursed more than once by the assistant farmer, the fellow who was driving that tractor. But those were great memories, and as I said, I made the princely sum of 50 cents an hour, which back then was pretty darn good for me. I also remember those fields as a place you could go hunting, pheasant hunting and duck hunting and trapping of mink and muskrats. There was a pond called Mises Pond that was part of, I think it was actually filled in as part of the Liberty Tree Mall, something that fortunately couldn't be done today. But back then it was, but you could hunt ducks and trap muskrats and mink, and then sell them over in Salem at Dexter's Furriers at the end of the season for $5, $10, whatever. Again, handsome sums of money when you're just a kid. So the farms, two different aspects of the farming that I remember. Summer nights in Danvers also included Twilight baseball. And as a big baseball fan, I was a Red Sox fan for sure, and Ted Williams and Carly Yastrzemski and all that. Well, the closest thing I could come to seeing professional baseball was the Danvers Twilight baseball program. And they played right behind the Holton Richmond. And 3 or 4 nights a week, the adults played, and it was just like, for me, it's like I was in Fenway Park North. Here in the town of Danvers, and it was just great to see all these people that you idolized. All looking back, they must have been in their late teens, early 20s for the most part, playing baseball. And it was really a community pastime. The stands were always full, standing room only, cheering on your favorite team. And I can remember being down there with my dad after supper, watching the Danvers Twilight League. And that's why oftentimes you'll hear the field, which is the primary field that Danvers High School uses. Sometimes people refer to it as the Twi Field. And that was the history of the Danvers Semi-Pro Baseball League. That was just a lot of fun. Growing up in Danvers, for me, it was a wonderful experience because of friends and the real sense of having a neighborhood and being part of a neighborhood. I was part of the Lawrence Street playground gang. I grew up on Ash Street, which is near Lawrence Street and Purchase Street. So we would have a basketball league during basketball season at the playgrounds, and we'd play different playgrounds. And we'd set up our own baseball teams, and we'd practice hitting home runs. Everyone thought they were Carl Yastrzemski or whatever out there having fun at the Lawrence Street playground. Back then, you could the entire neighborhood was your territory as far as where you could play. So we would play Ring-a-Levio and games where you could run around and hide in any neighbor's yard and not worry about things. You didn't have to worry about traffic or getting hit by a car or people who, might not be the friendliest. Everybody was friendly, and everyone watched out for one another's kids. You felt safe. You felt like you belonged, and you were part of that neighborhood. And to this day, I still have friends from the old neighborhood, and occasionally we, over a glass of wine, will reminisce about, hey, do you remember that time we did this? We had our own little touch football league, and we had all kinds of things that we did as a neighborhood. And I think Danvers, that was one of the things then that was special about Danvers, a sense of community and neighborliness and neighborhood. I think it's certainly different today in 2016, but I think that same sense of community and giving and being part of the community exists today in Danvers. And I live in Danvers still, and I intend to spend the rest of my days here and trying to give back through various volunteer activities. But that sense of Danvers being a first-rate community where you can participate and do things to try to enrich and improve that community, that's still there today. Well, I'm a proud graduate of the Danvers public school system. Attended several schools which no longer exist, but they did when I was a kid. Started in the Maple Street School, which is now the Maple Street Housing Development in downtown Danvers, senior housing. Went there for the first grade. Mrs. Warman was my first grade teacher. And actually had the pleasure to meet her 50 years later at a Danvers town meeting where she was being honored for her work as a teacher. And I went up, and of course, hadn't changed at all from the first grade, but she said she recognized me. But anyway, that was the first grade. Second grade through grade 5, I went to the Danvers Port School, which is also housing. And I was there the day that JFK was shot. And that's something I think people of my generation remember. Where were you that day? I was there in the Ann Luoma's 5th grade class, and the principal walked out and told us this terrible thing had just happened. From there, I went on to the Holton Richmond in grade 6, and actually I was, I guess, a bit unique. I attended the Holton Richmond grades 6 through 9. I was there for 4 years. My first year of high school, because of overcrowding, was spent at the Holton Richmond. They couldn't fit the freshman class at the high school. I don't think that would be something that would be tolerated today, but there weren't any other options really at that time. So I had 4 wonderful years at the Holton Richmond. I had some very influential teachers that I was fortunate to have, and it really helped develop an interest that I've had all throughout my life in history, particularly American history. From there, I did eventually end up on Cabot Road at Danvers High, and I had a wonderful high school experience for 3 years. In fact, I have my 45th class reunion coming up this weekend. We're an active class. I would expect a large group of people to be there, and I look forward to seeing how people are doing. Graduated in 1971, and that's the year that I met my lovely wife of 40 years, Nancy. We were high schoolers. She was from Linfield, I from Danvers. We met kind of at the halfway point at the North Shore Shopping Center. We both worked at a place that no longer exists by the name of Jordan Marsh Company. She was a record clerk. I was a stock boy who loved music and rock and roll. So I would hang around the record department when I could. One day this beautiful, striking redhead showed up and was working at that point. And some of the stock boys and I over coffee were reminiscing, or actually talking, I guess, about, boy, have you seen that new redhead that's working up there in the record department? And of course we all had, And I'm thinking that somebody is about to ask her out. Well, I wanted to make sure that somebody was me. So I think I left that coffee break and went up and asked her out. And the rest is history. We dated through the rest of high school, college, and all, and got married in 1976, 5.5 years later. And as I said, we've been married for 40 years, have 2 wonderful daughters, Jennifer and Catherine. And I'm enjoying a new phase of life, grandparenthood. I have a grandson, Jackson Parker, Azevedo, who is 3 years old. And my granddaughter, Noemia Marquis Azevedo, is 5 years old. And that is just a joy, grandparenthood. So we're enjoying all of our family, and again, living right here in Danvers. The grandkids are in Topsfield, so we can see them easy enough. From my perspective, I grew up in Danvers, as I've said, and I was fortunate enough to work for 35 years as town manager, almost 40 years in Danvers Town Hall. And it was an honor and really a remarkable experience for someone who grew up in a community to be in a position of leadership and to be able to give back and try to shape the community in the direction it wants to be shaped into. And it was a privilege for me to have the trust that was given to me as town manager, and I'm grateful to the community for that opportunity. It went by, those 35, 40 years, whatever, they went by in a flash. I have to say now when I look back, in the middle of it, it didn't seem that way. It seemed like it would go on forever, but nothing is forever. But I am forever grateful to have had the opportunity and the trust that was placed in me. I had an amazing staff that made it all come together. Wonderful political leadership through our boards of selectmen over the years. I don't know how many I served under, but quite a few, and many stand out as outstanding leaders. And one of the issues that we had to deal with that stood out in my mind was the explosion in Danvers Port. And it started for me, it was just a typical night after a selectmen's meeting. We got home late, unwound a bit by walking the dog, came back in, went to bed. And at 2:46 a.m. on Wednesday morning, November 22nd, I was awakened by what I thought was a plane crashing. And I'm proximate to Beverly Airport. I thought somehow a terrible plane crash must have just happened. My entire house shook. This is on Neal Road and off of Locust Street. And I quickly called the police station, and I could hear the phones were ringing off the hook at the police station. And I was told that something had happened in the vicinity of Eastern Propane in the Danversport section of town. So I got out of bed, put some clothes on, and went right down and saw something I'll never forget, with flames just shooting up from buildings and equipment in that facility right there on Water Street, across the street from where Eastern Propane was located. And the scene was certainly chaotic, but under control, thanks to the Danvers police and fire departments. And my job was to help coordinate the town response both that evening, making sure first and foremost that the residents were safely removed. And we had buses that we used to bring residents who hadn't gone out on their own, to bring them down to the Riverside School for safekeeping. And we did have some injuries. We had 10 people who were injured, but fortunately none of those injuries were serious. Thank God no one was injured. Governor Romney used the term a miracle, Thanksgiving miracle in Danvers happened that evening. And really the fact that no one died, I think, or was seriously hurt, is evidence that somebody was watching over us as a town. It was challenging, certainly that night, the days and weeks that followed as we worked to help our residents get back into their homes. Our building inspection team, Rich Maloney, Dave Harris and their staff, our public works team, Don DeHart and his staff, my team at Town Hall, everyone, police and fire, Jim Tutko, our chief in the fire department, and Neil Willett was the chief in the police department, did their jobs and did them well. I was proud of our staff and how they responded over and above and beyond so that the residents could be, again, relocated temporarily and then back into their homes safely as soon as practical. It was a long process, and for some people it was years before they were able to move back into their homes. There were insurance issues that had to be dealt with. Unfortunately, you had some older folks who, quite frankly, were not in a position physically and just emotionally to rebuild their homes. So there were several that were sold, and people didn't come back to the neighborhood. But I'm happy to say that the vast majority of people did come back. They were able to rebuild their homes. The state and Senator Fred Berry and Ted Spiliotis stepped up to provide some money, special fund through the legislature to help the town rebuild the infrastructure. And there were loans and other assistance provided to some of the businesses that were impacted. And slowly, over a period of months, you saw the neighborhood coming back to life, and to the point where it's a lovely neighborhood at this point. It's a waterfront neighborhood, really a peninsula out into the Danvers Harbor area. And for me and our staff, it was one of the most significant challenges that we faced during my tenure. But I am pleased to say that the outcome was a good one. I think we did our jobs and helped people through a very difficult nightmare for some. Well, you know, as communities grow and develop, they change. They're in some ways, and I grew up, as I was saying, with a sense of neighborhood, which was really the community. You could go anywhere and play and be out. My mom would say, "Be home when it gets dark," and you didn't have to worry about where you were. Now, you know, I raised 2 kids, and you know, it wasn't quite. The whole world changes a bit. Life is a little more complicated, so you wouldn't necessarily say when my kids were growing up in the 1990s, well, take off for the day and we'll see you when it's dark out at night. It's just a different world. So Danvers is part of that as well. So the sense that, you know, we're one big neighborhood is different today than it was then. So I don't know if that's good or bad. It's what it is, and I think we're not alone as a community. You just change in certain basic ways. I do miss the farms that were in Danvers, and I take my hat off to Bill Clark and those who were striving, working hard to maintain dirt farming in Danvers. You know, we're the onion town, which was named after the Danvers onion, and then we had the Danvers carrots, and so we had this rich agricultural history. We had Essex Aggie, the foremost agricultural school north of Boston in our town, which was a wonderful thing to have. So that emphasis on agriculture has changed. Most of the farms are no longer farms, but you know, those that are still out there, we have probably 3 different farms here in town. Still active, small, albeit they are smaller, and oftentimes they import their vegetables from other larger farms because, frankly, they don't have the acreage to grow them all themselves. So I miss those farms in that sense. Route 114 was a farm. And I remember Typert Farm and Dunn Farm, and right on 114 where now you have Ira Toyota and some major developments. So that certainly is a change. The mall itself, I mean, at the time the mall was the largest single development the town had ever seen. And it changed the shape of Danvers in terms of people coming to Danvers as a locus, that people coming from all over the North Shore. Wow, this new mall, the Liberty Tree Mall, we have to come to Danvers. So suddenly we had traffic, we had, in our police department, stolen cars really had not been much of an issue, and suddenly car theft appeared high on the radar screen. Well, the mall was there, and you know, people were unfortunately sometimes stealing cars from the mall because there were many cars there. So that was a change that we went through as a community. It certainly brought tax revenue. They still are the largest taxpayer, over $1 million a year in the town. And at the time it was a boon, if you will, for the town. But at the same time we also had growing school populations. The Dunn Wing was built at the high school to expand the high school. We had double sessions prior to that because of overcrowding. Those tax dollars helped to close the gap that was needed to fund education and increase services as Danvers continued to grow. So change happens, and I think it affects every community. Certainly Danvers was affected, but I think we can still say today in 2016, Danvers is a place where you want to be with your family, to raise your family, to go through your various phases of life, and we have something at every phase of life for you and for your family. And so it's still a great community in my book.